All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on parenting your teen's mental health. My name is Jonathan Byrne, and I work at MedPsych Associates. MedPsych Associates is a behavioral health practice based in North Jersey with offices in Ramsey, Old Tappan, and Montclair. We offer both in-office and virtual services in psychiatry, psychotherapy, neuropsychological testing, autism, and ADHD diagnostics. MedPsych has particular expertise in child, adolescent, and young adult populations, the majority of whom we serve. We work with many clients in the public and private schools across all of North Jersey. We also drive some clients, we receive some from New York over the border as well. So we're all on the same page. Our presentation this evening will be approximately 60 minutes or slightly longer. Everyone in attendance will be on mute, but please feel free to write in the comments or chat section as we will be able to see them and we'll be monitoring them throughout the session. At the conclusion of the presentation, we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have and we'll do our best to get to everything. My name, as I said before, Jonathan Byrne. I'm going to do a quick introduction of myself. So I've been in practice for 15 plus years at this point. I've spent the last 6 exclusively in private practice. Prior to that, I held directorial positions in intensive outpatient programs and partial hospitalization programs, as well as a director of admissions and school counseling at a local private school. I've spent time authoring a number of different programs on anxiety, trauma, substance abuse, young adults transitioning to college, as well as actually military as well. So first responders. I'm going to introduce our presenters this evening. Our first presenter is going to be Miss Abby Marshall. She comes to us with 10 plus years of experience working with children, adolescents, and families, including doing parenting and couples work. She's a trauma-informed therapist and has certifications in internal family systems therapy from the Ackerman Institute for Families and supportive parenting for anxious childhood emotions from Yale. Abby uses her extensive training to work with individuals and families who struggle with trauma, parenting, substance use, and psychiatric difficulties. Our second presenter will be Nicole Clark. She has 5 plus years of experience, 3 years of working in a local high school with adolescents. She primarily works with children, adolescents, and young adults, but also has experience working with families. She treats anxiety, depression, trauma, and stress, and best works with clients struggling with suicidal ideation and behaviors, grief, and negative self and body image. Our agenda today is we're going to discuss teens and mental health, parental tools and tips, school-related anxiety, and then we'll go over a question and answer. Our aim this evening is to make this presentation practical and grounded in what we see most often in our practice and give all of you a good idea as to what we're seeing in general in this adolescent population. I now hand it over to Abby Marshall, who's going to take off with the teens and mental health.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I'm really, excuse me, I have to go back up a little bit. I'm happy to be here tonight with you guys presenting on adolescent mental health. It's a passion of mine to work with kids and families, and I've seen teens struggling in a way that I haven't in my career. So I think it's a really important topic that we're talking about. As you guys know from living with teenagers, teenagers are growing really fast. Their brains are developing quickly. It's a time of rapid biological growth, psychological growth, and moral development. It's also a time when a lot of mental health issues start to develop and arise. So it's a time that we really want to intervene and meet these kiddos and treat them, because when we do that, we can make critical changes in their lives that can change the trajectory of how those mental health issues manifest. So if we intervene early, the things that could have been devastating and change the trajectory of a child's life, for the bad, can actually become an asset, right? And turn into resiliency and something that they learn from. So when we see these warning signs, we address them and we get our children help, they become stronger because of that. So I think that that's, something that we can learn in this webinar today. So suicide is actually the leading cause of death for children aged 14 to 18. I think outside of that, it's accidents. And mainly that's because kids are very healthy people, which is really great. In 2019, 20% of students reported that they had seriously considered suicide, which is sort of mind-boggling, right? To hear. And what's really great is that there's a lot of projects and organizations that are doing research on this phenomenon. And what they found is that 4 out of 5 of those folk who have thought about suicide, these teenagers, have shown signs that they are depressed, that they're withdrawing from friends, that things are changing for them, that there are things that they're showing in their external world that parents, teachers, friends are seeing that could be addressed prior to them carrying out something that's dangerous, or even before that. So some warning signs that you might see that indicate that there's a mental health issue are emotional changes, social changes, emotional changes like irritability, restlessness, changes in sleep, maybe hypersomnia, which is a lot of sleep, excess sleep, coming home from school, going down to the basement. Maybe they used to play games and now they're falling asleep on the couch and sleeping until dinner time. And then they're getting up, coming up to eat or not, and then going back to bed. That's a warning sign. Maybe they used to kind of keep a normal sleep schedule and now they're staying up all night and they're not sleeping at all and they're not tired during the day. That's another warning sign. That's something that we want to get a kid into treatment really quickly for. Social changes like avoidance of activities that they once loved, avoidance of friends, changes in friends, a totally different crew, people with parents that you don't know, going to different towns to hanging out in different places. It's not that that's necessarily bad. It's just something that we want to be curious about as parents, right? It's an indication that something is changing and we need to pay more attention. Loneliness and social isolation, again, big warning sign. Let's watch this. What's happening? Why is this kid withdrawing? What's going on? Physical changes, excessive weight gain, excessive weight loss, food restriction, changes in how we eat, what we eat. Is my child starting to restrict food, looking in the mirror, checking body, pinching weight on the, body weight, checking the mirror tons of times, unhappy with the body image. I mean, things like that. So weight gain, weight loss, food avoidance, food restriction, binging, purging, those are things that we want to watch out for as parents. Avoidance of commitments, changes in school performance. Obviously, if grades are going down, that's something that we want to look at. At the same time, I think if a kid, has never been an amazing student and all of a sudden they're studying all the time and performing like they've never performed before, that's something that I think we want to be curious about too. It's not that it's a bad thing. It's just like, what's happening here? This is a different kid. General apathy, hopelessness, self-injury, or threats of suicide. I mean, that's a clear warning sign, get help. And, that's something that we just really wanted to add in because we have to now, because of the environment that we're living in. Do any of you guys want to add anything to this slide, just because it's a really important opener?
No, I think you covered everything. That was great.
Moving on. So some common underlying issues that, we see with kiddos is family or peer conflict, bullying in the school, sibling rivalry or issues with siblings, parent conflict, issues with boundaries, punishments, right? Not feeling like they're in line with their parents or their parents' beliefs, divorce or loss, unidentified learning differences or neurodivergence. That's something I see all the time in my practice and all the way up into high school, late high school. And when those things are identified and addressed, it really changes how kids see themselves and experience themselves in school. Phobias or fears can develop anytime in a kid's lives. I find that, those are very common and typical and pretty easy to treat. Chronic stress or trauma. Every nervous system is different. And I think, this is something that we're learning more and more about in our field of psychotherapy and just in, human biology. So, some humans are born with a predisposition to trauma and are much more likely to develop PTSD or chronic complex trauma. And that's something that we have to be very aware of in our field because it causes emotional dysregulation and mood lability that impacts teens and can cause self-injurious behavior or suicidal ideation. And that's something that we really do want to address early and attend to in therapy and in psychiatry. And that also can lead to addiction, which is our next bullet. Screens, gambling, sex, alcohol, marijuana use, nicotine, prescription drugs, illicit drugs. I mean, so many things, right? These kids have access to, they know about, they are hurting, and they're going to find ways to self-soothe just like grown-ups do. And we just need to be mindful of that and make sure that we are using the skills that we have to teach them how to be safe and healthy. So, what our teens face is really different than any other generation that's ever lived on this planet before, that we know of, at least. And that's what all the research is showing. I didn't make that up. I think the Surgeon General put out a warning that teens are at risk. The president of the Academy of American Pediatric Psychiatrists put out a warning. So kids have been socially isolated. They have more access to social media and to everything, all the time at their fingertips. They've had a disruption due to the pandemic. They were not in school. They were completely socially isolated. There have been a few studies that have come out since the pandemic that have actually shown that children's brains have changed because of this social isolation and the parents' stress. And they have experienced some type of chronic stress from that experience. Mass violence, political polarizations, school shootings, not to mention the typical woes of being a teenager and what I believe it's I think it's Dan Siegel. He calls it brainstorm, right? Like it's like everything is exploding in their brains and forming and connecting and turning into an adult, and all around them the same thing is happening, right? So it's like, where is that safe space? The container for them to just grow and become the adults that they need to become to heal the world outside of them. So they're up against a lot. Just hold space for that, right? Kind of moving over, please excuse the red writing here. That's a little typo. But this is a case study of a kiddo that I worked with who came into therapy for pretty typical, right? She is 12 and she is in 7th grade, and mom and dad had, actually, interestingly, mom had long COVID and had this very, profound illness and was incapacitated. And Casey went back to school and started struggling with social withdrawal, stomach aches, visits to the nurse's office. She was not wanting to eat as much food. She was struggling with moodiness, and she really was not liking her therapist over COVID. It was in person, online. She wasn't doing any of the work. So she came into my office very resistant to therapy. She felt like nothing could help her. I worked with her to develop a rapport, which is just a relationship. We it took a couple of months, really. And we were able to identify her beliefs about like what did she want in her life. She wanted to be able to have fun. She wanted to be able to experience joy again and be with her friends. um, we identified that she had a specific phobia, a fear of vomiting, like some generalized anxiety. She was able to sustain her life in school. She was able to keep up her grades. She never had to miss. I was able to work with parents to stop accommodating her anxiety. So phone calls stopped. She wasn't able to call mom and dad because mom and dad let her know, like, we know you can do it at school. We're not going to answer when you call anymore. Nurse would redirect Casey back to, you know, class. And then, she would get through the day. Overall, she did well. She was okay enough. We decided that she needed a little bit more treatment. She went to a program for exposure response therapy, and she's overcome her fear of vomiting. She's at baseline. She is back in therapy with me, and we are working towards going on a sleepover. So that's sort of a classic example of a kiddo who has overcome anxiety in therapy. So moving on to parenting, as we know, things change a lot from like having little babies in our beds to having adolescents playing video games or, going out to the mall. How parents can help connecting and relationship. So that's really important. And it changes, right? Like we don't have as much time with them just snuggling on the couch when they're teenagers. I'm just going to move on. So we need to really adjust our parenting in the teen years. We need to really work to move the power dynamic and try to control them less and give them more autonomy over their lives. And by doing that, we're actually helping them to develop resilience and learn how to live their lives on their own. And I think that we can help ourselves do this by being really clear on our own values. Like, what do we want in our life? What do we want to teach our children? And how are we going to base our boundaries on our values? Like, we expect you to make safe choices when you're out in the world. We want to know where you are, and we're going to track you on your phone. And, that's kind of the responsibility in our home of having a phone because we paid for it. That's just one example. I don't, and that may be like a little tangential, but that's how I would frame it in my practice when I'm working with an adolescent. Acknowledge and validate feelings, right? Kids have a lot of feelings and they're really, really big. We might not always agree with them, but the feeling is a feeling. So we can validate that for them, even if we don't agree with it. It's a really important thing to do. Sometimes it can feel overwhelming to manage an adolescent's emotions, but it's important to acknowledge and let them know that it's okay. Practice unconditional love. Adolescents tend to feel like they're all alone in the world and no one loves them and they're annoying and bad. So, something that we can do as parents is just let them know that they're loved, that they're safe at home, that we accept them, even if we don't tolerate everything that they are doing. We want to communicate openly and honestly with our kids. Set clear boundaries that are based on our core values. We want our consequences to be directly linked to the boundaries, and they have to make sense. So we don't want to take away someone's phone because they didn't wash the dishes, because that really doesn't make sense, right? Maybe if you're up too late because you were on your phone all night, you get a curfew on your phone. That makes sense, right? So that's something that's a very important. Like, kids are looking for you to make a mistake so that they can tear you apart. So when you set boundaries, make sure that they're rational and make sense to the kids so that you're not fighting with them. Use age and behavior appropriate consequences, right? I mean, if you can't get your kid to do something, don't give them that consequence because it's not going to hold a lot of weight. Share your own personal experiences of failure and how you have overcome adversity. I think that's really important for kids to learn. It humanizes us. It lets kids know that we make mistakes. It teaches them about rupture and repair, and also allow them to repair their own ruptures, right? Like you can walk them through it, you can talk them through it, give them the skills, but try not to do it for them. So creating a healthy home, we talked a lot about like boundaries. Sometimes rather than punishments or boundaries, I like to talk about privileges and responsibilities. So with increased privileges come increased responsibilities. If you want, going to school is a job, right? When parents go to work, kids go to school. You want to have a phone, you have to follow the rules of having a phone, right? Like if things are framed in this way from the beginning, then kids do understand that there are some things that they have to do to continue having the privilege. But if it's harder to implement them, these types of responsibilities once kids already have privileges, it's not impossible. Kids, in the adolescent age range are able to do every household chore. They can mow the lawn, they can babysit. Most kids, I mean, you have to use your judgment, obviously. They can cook, simple to complex family meals if they've been taught. And, when they do those things, they feel valuable and like they're a part of the family, and they gain autonomy and independence. The way that we can engage positively in our teens' lives is by encourage healthy risk taking and maybe trying to do some of those things with our kids, like rock climbing or something. I don't know. Going on a really interesting trip with our kids, even if it's a road trip or the day trip, it doesn't have to be something that costs a lot of money. It could just be something that's novel. Explore new things with your teen. I recently went to a CEU event, and it was about like how children are engaging in social media and how we should be managing it as parents. And the best advice that they were able to give us as professionals was to be involved in this social media with these kids because it's not going away. And I found that actually really helpful. So it's like, we're not going to be able to ban it from these kids forever. So like if you can't like beat them, join them. That's like what I got from it. And it was kind of interesting because I was like, you know what? Like I that makes sense to me. Like I want to see everything that my kid is snapping. So I might as well be his friend on Snapchat, right? Stay curious with your kids. That's something that in the type of therapy that I'm trained in, it's like a motto. It's almost like a mantra, right? Like stay curious. Ask about friendships, invite friends over to hang out, like be engaged with your kids when you can. It's not all the time. We all have busy lives, right? Like you don't have to quit your job, but like ask questions and be curious and interested in what they're doing. They want someone to ask. They might say, I'm not telling you, but that doesn't mean that they don't like being asked. Create an environment that's fun and safe for your teens if you can, like where they want to hang out. Like if it's in the basement or in the garage and you can give them a little bit of space where they could be at your house. I have a 14-year-old. He's and his friends still like to jump on the trampoline occasionally, whatever, but invite them in, have an open door. You'll get to know all about the kids. So social media and technology use, I hit on that a little bit. I mean, again, take a balanced approach to helping teens use social media in healthier ways. I think we're all struggling with this, adults and kids alike. I mean, it's the easiest thing to self-soothe with. Social media charms and harms. Those are not my words. I thought, I was doing a lot of research for this webinar, and that was in one of I guess it's the American Academy of Pediatrics because I have it right here. So, it's wonderful. We love it. It's beautiful. It's also really dangerous. Kids, ages 10 to 14 need parental oversight and engagement. And after that, they might need coaching still because they're still going to get in trouble. I have kids that are getting in trouble at times for taking pictures and sending them on Discord, our favorite server. I'm sure you guys know about this. Anything to add? So establishing a support network is key right now, especially the research is showing, extended communities, extended family can care, like friends. This is all really helpful. Reaching out and connecting to your school professionals, like Nicole. She's works in private practice and she's also a school counselor. That's like first line. Considering professional therapy or a psychiatrist, that's next. How can therapy help? There's hundreds of ways, but like the one thing that I always remember when I'm working with a kid is, research shows that if a kid develops a relationship with one supportive adult in their life, that can change the trajectory of their whole entire career, right? School career, life career. A kid that's failing can now thrive. It also helps them to label and identify their emotions. It helps them regulate their emotions. It can help them with communication, distress tolerance. It can help to stabilize family. Anything else, guys? No?
No, I think that covered.
Okay. So we are going to move over into school-related anxiety. And I'm going to read something that a kiddo wrote before we start. Just give me a minute. All right. So I was given permission to share this. A whole week before school started, I began my preparations. I had to be undeniably perfect. It started with my eating habits. They had to be flawless. There could be no room for me to weigh over my set limit. God forbid I look fat. And my clothes had to be just the right amount of revealing. Enough to get attention, but not enough to be harassed. I sat down and did my makeup 15 times before deciding on the perfect look. It was enough that I looked airbrushed, but not so much that I looked cakey. I mentally prepared myself for the incoming bullying I was about to receive. Well, I knew I wasn't attractive, so I would overcome it by loudness, forced jollity, and sometimes by violence. Miriam Margulies. The night before school started, I waited. I waited and I waited. I waited. I sat there wondering when my motivation would appear. The motivation to start school. I tried to muster the courage to close my eyes and fall asleep, but the recurring thoughts of failure flooded my mind. I wished for someone to text me, for there to be an excuse to not sleep. I was gasping for air, choked by the knowledge of my own stupidity. I knew for a fact that as soon as I drifted off, I was doomed for dereliction. That night, I dreamt of falling down, down into an abyss of simple defeat. I think I'll end there and just let you take over, Nicole, because I'm noticing we don't have a ton of time.
Thank you, Abby, for that lovely transition. I think the client that Abby is talking about is personified in so many of my students that I see at school. I'm kind of bouncing between that therapist and counselor role tonight, in terms of, how I would look at my students at school versus how I would look at my clients at the practice. But there are many similarities that we're seeing. School anxiety obviously increased in an abundance after the pandemic, but we really did start to see these numbers rise, according to my colleagues, even before the pandemic. Thinking about everything that Abby has said so far today, you can kind of see why so many like traditional high school problems that we have all faced are magnified times 10 for this generation because of the use of social media. because of how social norms have changed, because of how gender norms have changed. We're really in a new environment of information overload and how these kids are taking what they learn on the internet and interpreting it into something that makes sense for them. So, with a lot of school-related anxiety and depression on the rise, that often, that also is going to cause for an increase in what we call school refusal or school avoidance. They're used interchangeably. I like saying school avoidance because I feel like it sounds a little less harsh than just refusal. But to start off, I kind of wanted to bring everyone's attention to this article that I saw in Forbes. Our current youth get a pretty bad rep at times, right? Gen Z. I'm sure we all have our different opinions in terms of what we think about our current generation, and a lot, not all these opinions are positive. So Gen Z, hopeless or hopeful. The article kind of goes back and forth between, people who critique how negative and hopeless today's youth often are. And it kind of makes sense. Our climate in the world, all these problems that we see pop up, today's youth are facing a lot of worst case scenarios. In my practice, I try to get kids to see like the evidence as to why worst case scenarios would not happen. And I often get I often get feedback from them that, but we didn't think a pandemic would happen and it did. We didn't think, all these issues with climate change would happen and it did. So they are very involved in today's political climate, more so than I think generations beforehand. And they're worried. They're really worried about the future. So you could see why a lot of them would have that hopeless attitude. But I see, particularly in our high school, a lot of hopefulness, a lot of hope that they are going to be the agents of change in the future. With this hopefulness, though, also comes this idea of pressure and perfection, right? Every move that they make in high school is so calculated. Every move that they make in middle school is so calculated for high school. It's like they're always thinking 10 steps ahead. And while we do see this, I saw that when I was in high school, again, because of social media, because they're hearing about what all these other kids and all these other schools and all these other states are doing, they feel like they need to be just as good. So, I think they are very goal oriented. I think they really want to see the good happen. But when you have this mix of pressure and perfection versus doom and gloom, you put that all together in a school environment, and it obviously creates a lot of chaos. So this is why, Abby, you can actually go to the next slide. So this is why we are seeing a big increase of school avoidance cases. So I do have a case example to start with. I'm going to call her Kelly for tonight, which is one of my 18-year-old seniors. The information that I'm talking about tonight it comes from her junior year. These past 5 days of school, she's been off to like a really great start, which we're really happy about. And I call her a success case because, she ended her junior year on a really strong and high note. But, what kind of brought her to my office and brought her to our attention is that she was in her junior year of high school and her absences were accumulating. I have here that she had 23. That's an approximation. I'm pretty sure it was much more than that. Our school typically cuts off with credit loss at 18 absences, but because this student was particularly talking about having panic attacks every morning that would give her these stomach aches, and she had this huge fear of becoming ill if she were to come to school that day, we started recognizing that the problem here was a bit deeper than just someone who didn't want to come to school. So thankfully, Kelly had a really supportive and communicative mom and dad, which is kind of the key to success here. That is what separates these more so successful cases from the ones that struggle still, is how involved and honest and communicative and collaborative the parents are with the school to get their child to a better space. So for Kelly, mom got her into therapy right away, where she was then diagnosed with OCD, which kind of gave us a better idea of why her mornings had to be set to a particular routine in order for her to feel comfortable to come to school. So what we kind of did was, she did unfortunately lose credit in one of her classes because of the amount of absences that she had lost. That ended up being kind of like a motivating factor for her, like that natural consequence of losing credit in a course kind of sparked her to be like, I don't want this to happen again, which means I need to come to school. So she ended up taking therapy quite seriously. She really tried to take what she was learning with her therapist and apply it to the school environment. And then on our end, we changed. So the credit loss, we changed to a study hall. We moved that to second period, and we put her gym as first period. So she had 2 periods in the morning where if she missed them, she wasn't losing the most content, right? Gym does matter in terms of attendance, but we can work around gym a bit more flexibly than we can with other classes where she's learning really important information. So, her absences turned into tardies, and then eventually her tardies turned into on times as the year went on. If there was a day that she could not come to school, mom had a whole schedule at home that she would make her daughter adhere to, which I'm going to talk about in a couple more slides. So overall, the communication between mom and dad and us was very strong. And I think that was the key in terms of getting Kelly to a more successful state, and hopefully very much prepared her for her current senior year of high school. Okay, so school performance and anxiety, kids are anxious in school because schools aren't always the safest place, right? Typically, even though there are these huge social interactions, not every child is sharing a class with their greatest friends. Sometimes they feel really isolated. Sometimes they feel really alone. Sometimes they can't form that safe connection with their teacher, which is so important to success in any school environment. So when the anxiety gets to such an uncomfortable amount, you tend to see these kids start to avoid coming to school during the day. So school avoidance is a regular refusal to attend school, or at least routine problems remaining in school. It does not equal truancy. So kids who are school avoidant are not truant. Truancy are kids that are like deliberately skipping school, right? So for example, we had a student one time, the parent dropped him off at the front of the school, left, and once they saw that his dad was far away, he booked an Uber to go to the airport because he had plans on going to Florida. I wish I was lying, but we kind of laugh about it now after the fact. But in the moment, we were like, that's terrifying. But that would be truancy, right? He was deliberately trying to miss school. His parents had no idea where he was. Versus school avoidance, you know that usually your kid is at home, your kid is safe. And the most important part are that kids are not deliberately trying to do this. Something is mentally blocking them from coming to school on time in the morning or coming to school at all, which shows that there's a deeper mental health concern under the surface that isn't really being addressed. Go ahead, Abby. So the 4 main causes that we typically see as to why school avoidance is happening. Number 1 is a distressing situation or object or person at school. So this could be they're avoiding a certain teacher, they're avoiding a certain class. Unfortunately, if the kid is getting bullied, that would be a huge reason as to why they would not want to come to school every day. Number 2, social situations or other related performance situations. So these are kids who maybe have test anxiety. These can be kids who can't present in front of the class. So maybe they're avoiding a presentation one day. This is typically where you will see kids who have mass amounts of social anxiety, right? So just being in the hallways with a bunch of kids all at one time can be very suffocating for a lot of today's youth. And that could be another reason why they're more comfortable and safe being at home. 3, seeking attention from parents and caregivers. It's not one I see most often in my high school, but this could typically look like people or children or students who have separation anxiety from mom and dad. They don't want to leave their side. They feel unsafe if mom and dad are not with them. So being at home with mom or dad, getting that attention is something that really soothes their anxiety in that moment. This also, I think, comes into play because after the pandemic, so many people started working from home. When kids know that their parents are home, it's more enticing for them to stay home with them. So that is where, this becomes a major cause in the school avoidance scale. And then the last one, which is obvious, it's much more comfortable to remain at home. I think everyone can kind of agree to that. For a lot of kids, school is a safe place, it's an escape, but for a majority of students, they don't want to be there. And, I think we can all, we can't blame them all to a degree. We can't blame them to a degree, right? There's a lot going on in schools nowadays that, they want to sleep in, they don't want to wake up early. If they see that a friend is staying home, they want to stay home so that way they can talk and be friends with each other. So those are kind of the biggest reasons why we are seeing today's youth become more and more avoidant of school. I thought it would be helpful to kind of demonstrate how avoidance ends up hurting anxiety in the long run. So when you have any negative emotion, whether it be anxiety, stress, fear, etc., we tend to, if we don't have the appropriate coping skills or emotion regulation skills, we don't know how to deal with that anxiety. So we tend to avoid it. Avoidance makes us feel safe, right? A safety behavior. It sounds like it's something that's helpful, but the only thing that it's doing is accommodating that long-term anxiety growth in the end. So the more and more that students go to school, the more and more that they're staying home, sure, it's giving them that relief at the end of the day. They feel very relaxed the second that mom and dad say you can stay home for the day. But the second that nighttime comes, the second that they start thinking about that next day of school, the anxiety returns. And the more and more that they go through that cycle, the more the bigger the increase of the anxiety in the long run, and the harder it is to get them back into the school system. So when it comes to school avoidance, you want to make sure that if you think there's an attendance problem occurring, you want to start intervening from a very early point. The school avoidance can obviously look like overall absences. They are missing complete total days of school. They are coming late to school. I've had students who've shown up at like 7th period because that was the earliest that they were able to get themselves to come to school. Kids who leave early throughout the day, that could be an example of school avoidance. Something about that afternoon portion really gets their anxiety going. Increased anxiety and distress surrounding school and school-related activities. So what you'll see here are these symptoms of anxiety will be so prevalent during the week. The second the weekend comes, they have no anxiety at all. All their symptoms disappear. They feel relaxed, they're sleeping, they're engaging, they're going out with their friends. Sunday night comes along, those symptoms return and they're freaking out again. Trouble sleeping during the weeknights kind of just goes along with what I just said. And the biggest one that I kind of see are increased class disruption. So we have a large group of students at our school that we like to call frequent flyers. These are students that will chill in the hallways. They are doing everything and anything to get into my office, and they will beg me to stay because they don't want to return to class. Not all these kids are like super anxious or depressed. I think they just, they don't feel comfortable in the classroom. So that in itself is anxiety, but sometimes they just don't like their teacher. They don't want to deal with the teacher. They would rather come talk to me instead, and getting them to go back to that class can be a big struggle. So these are the biggest factors that you're kind of seeing pop up nowadays. But I think as school avoidance kind of continues to be a major problem in schools, it's going to start looking differently from grade to grade. In terms of supporting your child, I think the biggest question that I get from parents is how much, where does that line fall between being a supportive parent versus accommodating or enabling that behavior, right? It's hard to get your student to go to school, to get your child to go to school in the morning. If they're kicking and they're screaming and they're yelling, when they get to an old enough age, you can't just pick them up and bring them to school anymore, right? So that's why, it's not just an individual problem of the student, it then extends into a family problem. Everyone becomes affected. Okay. So the biggest piece of advice that I can give to parents in terms of how to help their child is to, Abby, can you actually go back? So the biggest piece of support I want to give to parents is to communicate with the school. Like I said, if you are seeing an attendance problem start, you want to let the school know right away. It can be, I've had a lot of parents feel embarrassed that this is going on at the home. And, from on behalf of all school personnel, it's nothing to be embarrassed of. I know that's easier said than done, but your child's not the only child who is going through this. It's not a reflection of parenting. It is simply just something in the school is making them feel unsafe, and it's missed, and we have to find a way to address that in the best way possible. So what I want you all to remember to do is just to validate the child's concerns, let them know that it's understandable and okay for them to feel this way, but you want to hold your ground. If your child's going to school that day, they're going to school that day, no matter what time you're able to get them to go in the morning or in the afternoon. And then you can work with the school in terms of, what can we change in the school and what can you change at home to really get them out the door easier and easier every single day. Okay, you can switch Abby. So that first step is you want to address the concerns. Why is your child anxious to go to school the next day, right? What is making them fearful? What makes them feel unsafe? Most of the answers that you will find from your kids are going to be answers that need to be addressed by the school. Is it something that they can change? Are there any accommodations or modifications that we can make in their school day? The environment less intimidating for them. There is an act of bullying. We know who to target. We know to open up a HIB investigation. We know to find a way to separate that student from the person who is interrogating them. So our first topic is to just meet with any school personnel and have, encourage your child to be open and honest about what is making them scared. And then we all brainstorm as to how we can make the school place a more effective environment. Verify absences. So, if your child is going to be absent that day, tell the school. If your child is going to be late that morning, tell the school. That honesty, it really helps in the long run because it makes us feel like you're trying. And for a lot of these cases, we want to see effort there on the other end, because then it gives us a better idea of what's working and what's not working. So if you're able to verify those absences, I know at our school, a verified absence equals, teachers allow them to make up the work. If the parent isn't calling in the morning to state my kid's going to be late, my kid's going to be absent, then the teacher is not required to have them do a makeup assignment, right? So those verifying absences is really important to just ensure that they're staying on top of their homework, and that we have a better idea of where the child is during the day. Discuss and review reintegration strategies. So I have a list. This is what we typically use at my school or what we use in the middle school and the elementary school. Whether or not they work is dependent on the student. So it's kind of a trial by trial error. You have to see, you can put something in place. If it's not working, you modify it or you change it to something different. So some examples could be scheduled drop-offs between teacher and student. That's obviously going to work a lot better for younger children. I think if I ever showed up at one of my students' cars in the morning to escort them into the building, they would punch me like that. It's not something that high school age kids would be happy about. So a way that you can kind of accommodate it to that age group is a friend meets them outside the car every morning, or a friend waits for them and you give that friend permission to be late to school, so that way it doesn't start to affect them as well. Think of exposure therapy. You want to reintegrate them into the school slowly. So if they're missing days of school at a time, what can your school do to get them back in the environment in a less intimidating manner? So some of the things that we do is I will meet with a child, after school ends. They'll come in after the school day if I schedule an appointment with them, and we'll kind of take the tour of the school together. And the more and more that they're walking around the school and they don't see as many kids there, they're starting to become more comfortable with where things are and what the environment is like. Sometimes, our school will allow kids to stay in their sports and their clubs because that can get them to school, right? So if you're allowing them to attend club meetings, that's them seeing the school environment in a less stressful manner, and it makes it more enticing for them to come because they can kind of see the benefits that are provided with coming to school every single day. Similar to the case example that I stated before, you want to rearrange schedules, see if there are less intimidating classes that you can place at the beginning of the day. Not every child is always happy about having their whole schedule rearranged. It's kind of like a win-lose situation here, right? You kind of have to do what's best for the student. And sometimes the student doesn't know what's best for them when they're in such a constant state of anxiety. So rearranging schedules has been something that's worked. Preferred seating. So if there's a specific spot in the classroom that makes them feel more comfortable and makes them actually stay in their seat for a longer period of time, that can be helpful. Shortened days. So maybe if they're able to leave earlier in the school day, this one's kind of tricky. It does help more so our junior and senior classes who have less credits that they have to complete at that point. So they may be able to either leave a period or two early or come a period or two late. Their classes don't start until third or fourth period. That's something new that we're trying out this year. So I'm still waiting to see if that's something that actually works, but it could be a very, enticing modification to add to their plan, or give freshmen and sophomores something to look forward to as they reach their upperclassmen years. And then in extreme cases, we have home visits where someone from the school is visiting the home in the mornings to try and help the family get the student to school each day. The most important thing is altering the home setting. So what that means is if your child is staying home for that day, you want the home environment to mimic the school schedule, right? So they're not going to sleep in. You're making sure that they're up still at 7:45 to attend their first class. And then they're working on the work that they have on Google Classroom that they would be doing if they went to school, right? You can take their phone away from them during these class periods, give it back to them when they're able to have lunch, and just kind of mimic the school day as best as you can. Your kid is probably going to be mad at you for doing that, and you have to let them. There's a lot of shame associated with school avoidance and school anxiety. And sometimes we take that shame and anger out on the people that we love most, which would be you guys. And then obviously the last step is classification. So obviously Section 504 plan and the child study team evaluation. Most of the time you could start with the Section 504 plan. All those modifications that I spoke about before can be added to a Section 504. And that obviously just puts all the teachers on the same page about how we can help the child out in the classroom to the best way possible. INRS, intervention and referral services. This is basically what is used to bring students to my attention. So if we're noticing that a child is missing frequent days of school, they can be enrolled in INRS. And then I become involved and start working to see what the problem is here, and we can refer them to a 504 or an IEP afterwards. Therapy, I always say if kids are having such high amounts of anxiety in school, therapy or any other higher level of care would be helpful if it does get to that extreme route. The great thing about classification is that's the flexibility you get with attendance policies, and you can start kind of modifying the attendance policy to best fit the student's needs, similar to what we did with the student I spoke about in my case example. I think that's everything I have to say.
Thank you, Nicole. That was fantastic. So we do have a question, and I'd like to invite the audience to use the Q&A tab. If you can see that, if you do have any questions, you can post them there. They are confidential and anonymous. So we are the only people who can see the question that you ask. Or you can use the raise the hand feature, I believe, as well, and ask a question verbally, and I believe we'll be able to hear you. So, but with that first question, the first question that we received was, and I'm gonna point this towards Nicole, is what if the school is not supportive, right? What if a parent is struggling to get the school on board, or they're facing resistance? What sort of things, if you find that, what would you be coaching a parent on in that situation?
So I would coach the parent to read about their rights and the student's rights. Okay. If you feel like the school is not living up to their obligation as an education system, you have rights to go against that, right? If they are not being compliant with putting a 504 plan in place, look up the requirements for a 504 plan. Look at all the things that are allowed to be incorporated into that plan, and look up everything that is required to be in that plan, and kind of use that as evidence to support your case when you go in there to talk to the school. Children are young. It kind of, a lot of dependence falls on the parent to be that advocate for them. So, if you have someone working with you, if you have like a therapist or any friend, or of anyone working in a school system, they can help you kind of find your rights that you can argue. If you're talking to a counselor and you feel like they're not being helpful, they're not being vocal, I would go to the principal or the vice principal. And then even if the vice principal and the principal is not being supportive, you could always try going to the superintendent. It sounds extreme, but if what you feel like I'm saying is going to help your child and your school isn't allowing that to happen, you can always go to the superintendent and see what power they have in enforcing the school to do what they are legally contracted to do.
Well said. A couple things I would add to that, having been on the advocacy side before for parents who have had this struggle. First line of defense I found was, as an active advocating therapist, I would sometimes take the lead if I'm permitted to do so, right? So if I'm working with a family or I'm working with a client and we're finding that we're running into those roadblocks, I'll be someone who would happily write a letter, get on the phone, and start to push that process forward. Now, then if I run into roadblocks, I start to work with that family and collaborate with that family to lead them towards a couple of other options. There are parent advocates that are out there that are very helpful and know the legal process to a degree. And they will kind of jump in and handhold some of that. And then further above that, of course, in other cases, which I've also been involved in, there are education attorneys that you can speak to. They'll do often free consultations, most of the attorneys that I've worked with before, to give you a full, thorough rundown of what your options are. And then obviously, if you need to retain them and take it more down a legal road, you could do that. But I've often found that I find a lot of the districts locally are pretty responsive once a therapist does get involved. I've had a lot of success in that. I've had a lot of success also in obtaining 504s and IEPs through that process of just simply requesting them myself on behalf of a client.
So have I, writing a letter for a client, and can I chime in and piggyback?
Of course.
So I do the same thing as Jonathan does. I would say, before you go to the superintendent, I would go to the principal of the school. Obviously, I would definitely request a 504 letter from a therapist that, clearly defines what the accommodations you're requesting are for the child. And there, before you go to an advocacy, like hire someone, there are local advocacy groups that can help you for free, like the CPAC group in Montclair. So that there's special education advisory groups in each town and each municipality. And there's the SATPs and the PTAs that should be able to direct you to the advocacy group in your specific school that can then help you direct you to the right people in the school.
Thank you.
Just, to do it, that's about an easier way to do it for free. And then you can engage people for money if that doesn't work. But your child is federally protected once you have a 504 letter in place. So like Nicole said, there is a requirement that these kids are offered accommodations once they are diagnosed with a mental illness.
And I often found, even in my school, I'm not always 100% agreeing with like what our counselors and our principals say. I tend to support the parent here. But even in our school, once they bring out, the laws and regulations and they read them out loud to us, they have to abide. So I think it's definitely, it feels, when the school is not being supported, it feels hopeless, but there's a lot of hope out there if you search around.
We have a few more questions.
Correct. The next question that I'm seeing is, what sort of attendance policies would support students with school refusal or anxiety?
The ones that we most commonly use is, again, the one that I said in my case example, is anytime that she was struggling to come to school in the morning and it was related to her OCD diagnosis, we would excuse that absence. We wouldn't let it affect her negatively in any way. We put, that puts a lot of trust in the parents, and in these two parents, we definitely felt like they were being open and honest with us. And we tend to use that accommodation for those families who have maintained that honesty with us throughout the entire time. So if that girl just simply didn't sleep the night before, was up on all night on her phone, and that's why she couldn't get to school in the morning, then the mom would be like, she was up all night, like she's gonna be a little late, and we wouldn't really excuse that tardy. Very rarely, and this is for very extreme cases, we would excuse absences in general, and those were for kids who had evidence of a very significant mental health concern that was very much interfering with their ability to come to school. Those mostly are child study team children who, have a history of related behaviors. The attendance policy part of it is still a bit in the gray area. I think because school avoidant cases increased excessively after COVID, a lot of schools are still not sure about what to do in terms of best supporting the student, but not being too accommodating to the behavior and making it totally fine for them to just show up when they want to show up. But I've seen the one I mentioned in the case example kind of work most effectively with our kids.
Do you have a sense of what an updated policy could be? Like, if you were to be involved in that, what might a suggestion be as far as, hey, what would we put into our attendance policy as a school to put that language in that allows for greater flexibility when a student does have documentation, say from a parent or the therapist, right? And how do you kind of tie that all in together, right? To your point, I think the first thing is parents' transparency, honesty, and how they're communicating not only with the school but even potentially with their private therapist if they have one working with them at that time, right? So for me, it's how would we flesh that out and maybe deliver it, right? If a parent wants to go and advocate, say at a school meeting or a school board meeting, to say, hey, we've been seeing this pattern, what's a good policy, right? If they could deliver that to someone, what might you suggest?
So it's kind of tricky because I do understand that schools have to be in compliance with New Jersey laws about attendance. So their attendance policies aren't really something that they create themselves, kind of coming from those higher government bodies that are stating that kids need to be in school this % of the time. But what my school is trying out this year for the first time ever, because of parents that have advocated for this exact reason, is we are offering credit recovery sessions. So if a child is accumulating too many absences, they're not in class, they're not receiving in-person content, and that is severely affecting their attendance and their schoolwork, we have the option for them to come in on Saturdays and complete credit recovery courses. And then obviously Saturdays, I mean, our school's starting them at 8 a.m. Do I think they should start at 8 a.m.? No, because then again, we're running into the same avoidance issue. But I can't give you advice as to whether or not that works because it's only been 5 days. We haven't had anyone hit that credit recovery need. But, you know, if you want to advocate to your school to kind of change something within their policy, I think a credit recovery option is a really good idea. And I'm interested to see how that helps our school in general as well.
Okay. Thank you. Another question we have is, do you have recommendations for schools that cater to school avoiding kids other than Fusion? Fusion is a one-to-one student teacher ratio school. There's one in Montclair, there's one over in Inglewood. I'm not sure where else they've been talking. I think there's also one in Morristown. So those have certainly raised in interest. There are other schools out there that do cater to school avoiding kids. You know, what was that?
There's Paradigm, which I think
Correct.
is Paramus. There's it's on the
so they're stepping forward, which is sort of like a PHP where kids can go and get like treatment specifically for school avoidance and then transition back. But it's changed a lot since it was initially developed. I think that any of the schools that you send a kid to, they're going to face the same type of issues, right? That they face in a public school, but it's a smaller setting. So, I mean, Jonathan, you've worked in school settings also.
Yeah, I was going to say,
and therapeutic schools specifically. So that might.
Yeah, you can look at so the difference is Fusion's not necessarily a therapeutic school. You can look at therapeutic schools, but those are going to be Sage Day, Cornerstone, which are two of the prominent ones in that area.
They're hard to get into too. So
less therapeutic schools are schools like Fusion, Barnstable Academy, Paradigm. Newmark is another one that I have some familiarity with. And these things do continue to kind of pop up, to be honest. I do find that a lot of the private schools that are just smaller schools often will work with school avoiding kids and design plans specific to assist them with getting into the school. I've even had success working with, over here in Ramsey, we're right next to Don Bosco. So I've had some success even working with them when I have a school avoiding kid with their school counseling department. So I think a big part is just how we advocate and develop a plan. But obviously, if a student needs more care than that, you want to make sure that they have a thorough enough support network within that school frame to provide the support in that area. Is there anything else that anyone wants to add to that?
No, I'm actually like running through all of the schools that I work with, and the most comprehensive and helpful school that I've ever worked with is West Orange High School, interestingly. And I've worked with every school, like many schools in many different districts around here. I work out of the Montclair office. I know that that's a question that's further down, where we all come from, what districts. But I work in, I've worked in Short Hills, Millburn area, Maplewood, Montclair, Paramus area, Parsippany. And I think it really just depends on who is working in guidance and overseeing child study team. And I also think it depends on your kid, right? Like there are some kids who are going to thrive in a one-to-one setting, and that's what they need based on like their neurobiological profile. And then there are most kids really are going to thrive in a setting with other kids. It may be hard for them, but that's something that they could benefit from if, it's safe and they're taken care of and the right accommodations are in place.
I would also add that one of the comments that I see that popped in from a participant was West Orange is a great district. East Mountain is also a supportive therapeutic school. So just a couple more to toss out there.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So people are helping. Thank you.
Another question out there is, and I'd send this one to Nicole, who is responsible for regulating workload for a student who has been placed in a therapeutic setting but needs work sent from the school?
So our school has, I don't know if it's in our policy, I'm going to assume it's in our policy. We set this student up with home instruction. So we have teachers in our district that will sign up to provide home instruction to students after the school day. So this is typically most often referred to kids who like have an injury or have an illness where they have to stay at school. They are unable to physically come to school during the day. So their classes would be virtually, or they would meet up in like the library in town and have, review whatever is assigned to them by the teacher with someone in that subject present to help them with their course load. So any student that is sent to a therapeutic setting and has access to their computer or is able to get online, we will set them up with home instruction. So not only are they getting help from whatever school, whatever teacher or academic counselor is in the therapeutic setting themselves, they also have that backup from teachers within the district who are able to give them further education. I know in other school districts, I think the people who are responsible for that workload would be the guidance counselors.
Okay. There's some clarification on that question, which is for a child who is in a medical facility for mental health crisis, what processes do some of the schools have in place to manage workload for a child who may have anxiety about missing the schoolwork?
Okay.
Right. So how would a school accommodate that? Right. Is there grace given? I would say by the teachers. I find that happens to be the case most of the time. Anytime I've had a client hospitalized or in a medical facility due to crises, every school that I've really worked with has been pretty lenient with giving them adequate time to complete that missing schoolwork. I think it's just a matter of making sure that we're communicating effectively with the school and requesting that grace period. We don't have much time for any other questions, but
someone's going to be unmuted.
What was that?
Someone is going to be unmuted to ask a question.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Sorry. Is that right, Kyle? I think that's happening.
There, Kyle said.
Oh, never mind.
Okay, never mind. So I wanted to just get to, let's see, a couple more questions before we go. I would say, at what point would someone consider online school? What point do you feel like a client should be recommended for online school solely?
Personally, I'll take that question if you want me to.
Sure, go ahead. Yep.
I would for my clients, I would work really hard to make that a last resort option. So I would view online school as it's not as, I don't view it as negative, but I think that I think a child misses out on a lot if they don't get to go to school with other kids. So I would work really hard with the child to identify what their core values are, what they hope that they're going to gain from, online school, how they came to that decision. What I understand, there are situations where there are really dire circumstances and, parents are at their wits' end. But I really would view it as a last resort, sort of in the category of getting a GED, because of the isolation that coincides with online school. So
what sort of things would lead you though to say, I've tried everything? What do you think would make you say, you know what, for a period of time, I'm okay with online. It has to be this way.
I think because of COVID and students having this prolonged period of time being at home and learning, there are a number of students who have felt more comfortable and have felt like they were more productive being able to learn from home. So, I think when you have tried a bunch of accommodations, they're going to therapy, they're seeing a psychiatrist, we're addressing all the concerns. They understand that like the school is a safe place, but there's still something physically that is just stopping them. It's your decision as a family. I would, have like a family session with the therapist, kind of sit down, and make that decision based on what you think is best for your child and kind of go with your gut instinct at that time. And the online schooling can be really effective for your kid. That's why we're saying when it comes to the school avoidance issue, it's a case by case basis. It's going to look different for every student and every family that is involved.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Thank you. That was very good.
Yeah.
And then the last thing that we'll close with is there was a question, if depending on who's comfortable answering, feel free to answer how you'd like, but one of our participants asked what school districts we are from. So I will tell you a couple of things. One, my children attend a private school in Upper Montclair called St. Cashin. But I am from the West Orange School District. And in my experience, I've worked with most of the districts in the local area, to be perfectly honest. So I've had tons of experience with just about every district in the area, because when I was at the private school where we worked with a lot of the local public schools, I had a lot of interfacing with schools, advocating for students to come attend our private school. So, I have a lot of familiarity with the local districts, and I've found that most actually are pretty easy to work with. There's a couple that I would say could be exceptions to that rule. I'm not going to name names, but for the most part, I've had a lot of success with that. So if anyone else is comfortable with that, feel free to share your thoughts, and then we'll close this up.
So I'm currently in the Fort Lee School District. It is a very large district. There's 4 elementary schools, an intermediate school, middle school, and then you eventually hit the high school. So I think we have a lot of mental health resources put in place. Or when I say a lot, there's at least 2 of the crisis counselors in the building. We have a very large guidance counselor team, and other crisis counselors kind of located throughout the other schools. So I feel like we have more than some, but I've also seen other districts that I've worked with through one of my internships in grad school. I was at the suspension alternative program in Hackensack. That is kind of, they are in contract with the majority of Bergen County school districts that send their children who are frequently suspended to our program, to receive therapeutic interventions and try and see what the behavioral concern is. So through that experience, there were a bunch of school avoiding kids who were coming through. And we, in that week or 2 weeks that they stayed with us, we would make a bunch of recommendations as to how the school would help them, and generally received a positive input from that as well.
So I'm in the Montclair school system, public schools, for both of my kids. My older daughter's in college, is graduated from college. So I've been around schools for a long time.
Thank you very much for everyone sharing, and thank you
and
everyone
I'm an
for
IEP
attending.
mom, so that's another just an added benefit. So I've navigated this system. So yeah, thank you, everybody. I wish we could see your faces.
Yes, me too. We unfortunately did not see anyone's faces. It's learning Zoom as a webinar platform.
Yeah.
But thank you all very much for attending. We appreciate your time this evening, and we hope that you obviously found it very informative and helpful. Feel free to reach out to us if you ever have any additional questions. We are certainly accessible.
Yeah, so find us on MedPsych.
You can find us on MedPsych's website and email us directly. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.